So this is the Easter season, and the resurrection of Jesus is at the very heart of our faith. An obvious question to ask ourselves is, what actually happened? What actually happened to Jesus at Easter? Well, apparently God raised him back to life. And at this point, there will be people who would stare back at us and say, you cannot be serious. And we'll come back to that point in a minute. But here's another question. What actually happened to the friends of Jesus? For the friends of Jesus, fear was the obvious emotion. That was the first emotion of Easter. The Bible itself makes it quite clear, but it's clear just by spending a moment thinking about it. What would you have been thinking if you were one of the first followers of Christ and you've just seen him executed? The friends of Jesus were temporarily trapped, not just in shock at the sudden death of their friend. Jesus had been executed as a threat to society. Life was cheap in those days. And by their association, they might too be in trouble. There was a possibility of them facing crucifixion or stoning or flogging or a time in prison. The disciples had to get themselves out of Jerusalem. Apart from anything else, this was not their time. But it made sense to lie low for a while before attempting to go past the gates of a walled city that was very heavily guarded. They were in hiding. Fear was uppermost. So what changed that fear? What changed fear to faith? Well, it wasn't an improbable story told to them by somebody else. The answer is encounter. Not one of the disciples believed in the resurrection because of what somebody else said. In every case, they needed to meet Jesus for themselves. They needed to experience Jesus for themselves before resurrection became real. Today we've got the story of Thomas and his reaction to what happened at Easter. And perhaps because this account has been told in more detail than most of the others, we tend to single Thomas out and we heap on him criticism. Thomas was a doubting one, we say. He had to see proof, we say. He needed to actually see Jesus before he believed, we say. And we make out like that's unusual. We make out as if he was the only person who was thinking like that. And instead of looking at the stories we've got and noticing that all the other disciples were exactly the same. Every one of them needed to experience Jesus for themselves before they believed. And the only difference between them in that particular late night was that the other disciples present had already met with Jesus, and Thomas had not yet had that opportunity. Now, sometimes you'll hear Christians arguing over whether Jesus' resurrected body was physical or spiritual. It's as if the thing that matters most is what people actually saw with their eyes. But what if that is not the point? What if matters most isn't what they saw, but what they encountered and experienced? As if Jesus could be physical but not spiritual at the same time. As if the resurrection of Jesus was really about a corpse coming back to life. One big thing that stands out about the resurrection is that all the encounters that people have and all the descriptions that there are of Jesus are all different. Everyone is different. Sometimes the resurrected Jesus looks like Jesus, but other times he doesn't. Sometimes he's not recognised at first, and then on other occasions people know who he is straight away. When we hear about Jesus cooking a breakfast and eating fish well, that seems physical. In today's account, showing his wounds, his hands and his side, that seems physical. But appearing right in front of them when they're in a locked room, that doesn't. In the New Testament, Paul lists various occasions where Jesus appeared to people, and one of these experiences he relates is his own. And yet when Paul talks about personally meeting Jesus, the risen Jesus, it's a blinding light that he sees. What Paul experiences is more of a vision than a physical body. And yet his experience was clearly real and life-changing. And I guess that's the point. There's a mystery about what happened and people's descriptions of their experiences. And what they all have in common is an encounter with Christ turns their life around, which leads to a totally new understanding of life. In other words, the key is not what people saw with their eyes, but what they experienced. The key was their encounter with Jesus and what it meant to them. The experiences were all different, just like our experience of God today are all different. One good illustration of this in today's reading comes from the words of Thomas himself. What did Thomas say to Jesus? He said, "My Lord and my God." Now, this is in the Bible after all, and these kind of words crop up all the time, and you might not think very much about them. But just think of the context. And let me ask you this. If somebody you knew died and then seemed to be alive a couple of days later, do you know what you would say to them? Goodness knows how you might respond. Goodness knows what you might say. But if you saw somebody rise from death, would you choose these words? Would you hail your friend by saying, "You are my Lord and my God"? I don't think so. Whatever you might say, you wouldn't say that. What came to Thomas and all the disciples ultimately was not just an amazing thing to see, it was a whole new understanding. And it's that understanding that unites Christians from that day to this. We're not Christians because we believe in some extraordinary, spectacular event that took place a couple of thousand years ago. It's not just, wow, amazing, Jesus is alive, a dead man is no longer dead, a corpse has come back to life again. We're Christians because we have an understanding of Jesus. We believe that Jesus is unique. We believe that Jesus is alive and can be encountered. Jesus is Lord. That means we follow him above all others. Jesus has been chosen by God to show us clearest of all what God is like. And so for Thomas and the disciples, hope replaces their fear. Joy replaces their despair. Excitement replaces their gloom. A new beginning comes out of this ending. Life comes from death. The disciples were set free from fear, not because circumstances had changed, not because the Jewish authorities had softened their views, not because the Romans were no longer a threat, but because they had a new understanding of reality that meant all these other things paled into insignificance. They were still in danger, but they didn't care, because what they knew now changed their outlook in everything. God's love, God's presence, God's ultimate protection removed their fear and filled them with courage and hope. What was opening up to them was a new way to continue the work of Jesus, a new appreciation of what Christ had said and done, that it was right all along, and the understanding that if Jesus was ultimately safe in God's hands, then they would be too. Thanks to their encounter with Jesus, they knew this wasn't the end, but the beginning. They knew Jesus' way was right, and they knew beyond doubt that God is real and dependable. Now, I can be sure of this, that all of us right now have our own issues to face. And there are issues like the coronavirus that face us all, one way or another. The issues we face always include problems. Now, hopefully we're not feeling so bad, we're hiding away behind locked doors, although thanks to lockdown we might be feeling a wee bit like we're shut away. The wonderful news of Easter doesn't magically change the circumstances of our lives, whether they're good or bad. What it does do is it gives us another and a greater reality with which to face these circumstances. A new perspective, a whole new understanding. And we can take heart like the disciples did. If we, like them, can realise that Jesus lives, that he is Lord and God, and that death and evil are powerless to stop God's love and care and protection, we can rejoice with Peter and Mary and Thomas and all the rest. Thanks to Easter, the things that we struggle with will never have the last word. Whatever situations we face, God goes with us, and God will bring us safely through. I came across some words from a minister in America who writes for United Church of Christ Daily Devotional, and she wrote these on April the 13th, on Easter Monday. And she said this: "When the humans I love are facing hard times, which seems to be all the time these days, I'm fond of lifting up the modern proverb, everything turns out all right in the end. If it's not all right, it's not the end." And she has gone and summed up Easter right there. With God, everything turns out all right in the end. If it's not all right, it's not the end. Thanks be to God.